When the plane took off, everything was normal. The engines were running smoothly, and the conversations inside the cabin continued as a low hum. Passengers had fastened their seatbelts. Some were trying to sleep, others were looking out the window. The air was calm. No one could have predicted what would happen just minutes later. This flight had been made many times before. For the pilots, it was routine. For the passengers, it was a short and simple journey. No one was worried. Weather reports showed no problems. The sky was clear until that moment arrived. On December 24th, 1971, the plane had taken off, and after a short time, something suddenly went wrong. At first, a light jolt was felt. Then, a stronger vibration followed. The sounds in the cabin briefly stopped. The pilots focused on the control panel. Some passengers lifted their heads, but there was still no panic. Turbulence happened. At least, that was what everyone believed. A few seconds later, the shaking returned. This time it was more violent. The aircraft began to lose altitude. The seatbelt lights came on. The cabin crew tried to speak, but their voices carried concern. People began looking at one another. Silence gave way to whispers. Then came the noise. The sound of metal tearing, followed by the sensation of an uncontrolled fall. The plane was shaking, changing direction, accelerating. At this point, time slowed in a strange way. There were screams, but they felt distant. Some closed their eyes, others gripped their seats. From the plane crash, only one person survived. Her name was Juliane Koepcke. When Juliane Koepcke opened her eyes, everything was silent. There was no engine noise, no human voices, only the sound of wind and distant nature. Her body was in pain, but she could move. Lepten, in 2000 down. She did not know where she was. She could see the sky, trees, soil, pieces of wreckage. She tried to stand. She lost her balance and sat back down. When she looked around, she realized no one was moving. She called out. There was no answer. She took a few steps, then stopped. This silence was more frightening than the crash itself. After a while, she understood the truth. She was alone. The plane had crashed. The journey was over, and the only person who had survived was her. But the real question was not surviving the crash. The real question was what would happen next. Because help was not going to arrive right away. And here, everything was just beginning. The first hours passed in pain. She examined her injuries one by one. Some were superficial, others were deeper, but the bleeding had stopped. Shock was still taking effect. She could not fully feel the pain yet, which made it even more unsettling. She walked around the wreckage, broken seats, torn metal, and silent bodies. She tried to stay away from those images. Her mind was not ready to carry them. She needed to find water. There were a few items she had managed to salvage from the plane. Some food, a few pieces of clothing, and a small first aid kit. At first glance, it was not much. But at that moment, it was everything she had. Finding direction in the forest was difficult. The trees all looked the same. The sky appeared identical from every angle. As the day went on, the temperature rose. Thirst began to make itself known. She looked at the plants around her, examined the leaves. She did not know which ones might be safe. One wrong decision could completely erase her chance of survival. So she was cautious. She moved in small steps. She tried not to take risks. When night fell, fear revealed its true face. As the forest grew darker, the sounds multiplied. Unfamiliar animal noises, the wind moving through the leaves. Everything felt more threatening. She tried to light a small fire. It was difficult, but she succeeded. The flames provided not only warmth, but a sense of psychological safety. The fire could not go out. As the days passed, her sense of time began to distort. She tried to count the days, but soon gave up. Numbers reminded her of exhaustion rather than hope. Instead, she created routines. In the mornings, she checked her wounds and scanned her surroundings. In the evenings, she prepared the fire. Survival was no longer something she thought about. It had become something she repeated. Hunger was a slow but determined enemy. Her body weakened, her reflexes slowed, but her mind was still working. She kept telling herself the same thing. I am here. I am alive. That sentence stayed with her for days, because there was no other voice. At some point, she accepted that the chance of rescue was small. This was not giving up. It was facing reality. She did not know whether search teams would come, but she knew one thing. If she was going to survive, it would depend entirely on her own effort. From that moment on, she was no longer someone waiting to be rescued. She became someone who chose to survive. Her body grew weaker with each passing day. Moving required more energy, and even simple tasks took longer. The wounds did not fade away. They kept reminding her they were there. But her mind was still standing. That was her greatest advantage, because survival was no longer about physical strength. It was about determination. One morning when she woke up, everything around her looked the same trees, the same soil. But something inside her had changed. She understood that waiting was no longer an option. Staying inside the forest meant remaining invisible. She had to reach a more open area, a river, a clearing, somewhere she could be seen. Without leaving a trace, she would never be found. She took only what she could carry. Anything more would slow her down. She began to walk, slowly. Every step was calculated. She could not fall. She could not get injured. This time, there might not be a second chance. Along the way, she stopped, rested, and continued again. Time stretched, but she was moving forward. At one point, her strength ran out. She sat on the ground and tried to steady her breathing. She closed her eyes. In that moment, giving up would have been easy, but she did not. Because stopping meant staying, and staying meant never leaving this place. She stood up again, slow but determined. Eventually, she reached an open area. The sky was more visible here. She raised her voice. She placed stones as markers. She positioned a piece of wreckage where it could be seen. These were small actions. But now, everything depended on small details. And one day, she heard a sound she was not used to. Distant, but clear. Human voices. At first, she was not sure. She did not want to imagine it. But the sound came again. This time, closer. She shouted with all the strength she had left. They followed her voice. Rescue did not come suddenly. It was quiet, simple, slow. When help arrived, what she felt was not joy, but relief, because reaching this point had already been the hardest part. She was carried away. Speaking was difficult, but she was breathing. What came after was another life. Crowds, questions, long silences. She had survived, but that did not mean everything was over, because the days she spent alone would continue to live with her. This story was told as if it were a miracle, but it was not a miracle. It was the result of one human being choosing not to give up. Please do not forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.